Hello everyone, hopefully you've all had an absolutely fantastic day so far. So this is just me just trying to pass the time and also try and be a bit of benefit, for people that are interested in learning more about the Bible. So this really is just a pilot, like a tester, to see if people actually want to carry on going deeper into this. So this video is just going to be looking at the background of Mark's Gospel, and if people are interested, then we'll carry on and we'll just go deeper and deeper into the text itself. So the first thing that we're going to do is just talk about what inspired Mark to write it and what were the key elements that we can see in the gospel which can make us go, oh, this is what Mark was thinking of whilst he was writing his account of Jesus' life and ministry. So as I've already said, this gospel within the eyes of the church and within the tradition of the church is written by a guy called John Mark, and Mark is the first person to write an account of Jesus' life, and being so, setting the standard for other gospel writers, people like Matthew, people like Luke, and as well as John. Most of the time, Matthew, Mark and Luke are always lumped up together because they normally view Jesus through the same perspective, and if we look in the Greek for a term that says same perspective, we get this word called synoptic, so synchronized as in synchronized dancing, and optic as in you go to the opticians, same perspective, same eye, the synoptic gospels. Unfortunately for Mark, he didn't get much recognition until the 19th century because how the New Testament is ordered, it goes Matthew, Mark and Luke. Some people thought that Matthew was the first gospel that was written and Mark simply copied off of Matthew, and even some people think that Mark copied off of Matthew and Luke collectively and made a lot more of a condensed gospel. But what people started thinking about 200 years ago now is, hold on, why would Mark's be so short and he's got so much material from the other two Gospels? Wouldn't it make more sense if Mark was the first one to be written, setting the standard for Matthew and Luke? And so Matthew and Luke saw inspiration from Mark and then added on their own stuff as time and traditions and stories went on in the first century. And that is kind of a perspective that most people have now of Mark. He was the first person to write a gospel. As I've said now a couple of times already, that Mark's gospel was actually written by a guy called John Mark, and we actually see him within the New Testament. We see him in the book of Acts, in Acts 12, when Peter escapes from prison and he knocks on Mary's door, and John Mark is there in the room. We also see John Mark, he goes on mission trips with Paul and Barnabas. Unfortunately, he does get a bit cowardly, gets a bit scared, and he jumps out and is like, I don't want anything to do with this. But then we also see him interact with other apostles, mainly Peter. It's mainly through his interactions with Peter and many of the other apostles that he would see how the gospel was being preached. So imagine you're walking around, an ancient town somewhere in the Mediterranean, and you come across a guy on the street corner and he's preaching about this Messiah figure, this Lord who's come and died on a cross so that we can have a brand new life in him. And they're using massive, impactful words so that way they can get our attention. Words like "and," as well as "immediately," "suddenly." This big thing happened, which will make people turn their heads and go, oh wow, I better listen to this. And it's more likely than not that John Mark was listening to Peter preach his messages on those street corners and was able to document Peter's own personal experience of Jesus within the gospel that we now know as Mark's gospel. The world of the Bible is also quite important in trying to understand Mark's gospel, and with that being said, most of the New Testament, whether what was happening in the political world or what was happening within the religious eyes of Israel. And these are the type of things which would be happening during this time. The first thing that I want to emphasize right now is that the whole purpose of the New Testament is to show that Jesus is the fulfillment of the scriptures of the Old Testament. So before we do anything, before we get into anything quite serious with the New Testament, we need to know what the Old Testament says. So it'll be pickpocketing certain chapters or reading the whole thing, but for now, it'll be good to read chapters like Daniel 7, Psalm 22, and Isaiah 53. It's also important as Christians to remember that the New Testament has been painted in a way that unfortunately, we see the Roman Empire just like looming in the background. It's so important for us to remember this because at this time within the world of Israel, they were getting invaded by a lot of nations. Nations like Babylon, places like Persia, and even the Greeks got a little of the Israelite pie. But when the Maccabean family finally kicked the Greeks out of Israel, they had about 100 years or so of peace without actually having to suffer with people, raining down on them. But unfortunately, the descendants of the families started to bicker with one another, saying who was actually in charge of Israel. And it wasn't until 69 BC where Pompey, a Roman general, came to Israel to see how he could solve the problem, because they were disputing that, oh, who's in charge? Who's in charge? And Pompey kind of responded with, well, it ain't you two. So Pompey walked into Israel and said, all of this land right here, it's the Romans now, you're going to have to deal with that. And that is where we find Israel at this point within the story of the New Testament. Many emperors came and went during this time. So in 69 BCE, Julius Caesar was in charge of the Roman Empire at this time, but 63 BC was when his son Augustus Caesar came onto the scene, as well as another Roman emperor, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Ooh, keep you guys interested. Let me, yeah. Caesar Augustus then was the adopted son of Julius, and when Julius Caesar died, it was believed within the Roman circles, within the Roman Empire, that when Julius died, he rose up and became a divine figure. And so with that, it was believed that Caesar Augustus was seen as the son of God. When Augustus then became the Roman Emperor, he then went on a mission to seek revenge and bring justice to those who assassinated his father. And by doing that, he brought the whole Roman Empire back into a time of peace. A historical artifact which we can actually look up on, called the Priene inscription, says that because of the birth of Augustus, good news or gospel was finally brought to the world. And the final emperor, which we need to talk about today, is the emperor known as Nero. He reigned from 37 to 68 AD. And in the year 63, a great fire occurred in Rome, bringing the whole Roman city down to the ground pretty much, as far as I know. If not, that's fine. You can correct me on it later, you historical enthusiasts. It's normally been led to believe that Nero started the fire himself. However, when people asked him, oh, how did the fire start? He responded by not singing Billy Joel. Instead, he put the blame on the Christians. And it was from around this time when the Christian church was heavily persecuted around this time. And it's from that point on, especially around the time of 66 AD, where this persecution was taken to the next level. People like Peter, people like Paul, and many other Christians were persecuted and martyred for their faith, either being beheaded or being crucified upside down, or being fed to the wild animals in the Colosseum. Or the worst one, in my opinion, is being used as gas lanterns in the night, being poured on with oil and being set alight on some posts in the Roman cities. It's most likely then that because of the great persecution and all the people getting killed for their faith, a lot of Christians, if not all of them, would have been looking to God saying, God, where on earth are you within this situation? Where on earth are you within these circumstances? And I like to think that Mark was writing in response to these questions, showing that Jesus not only understands what we're going through, but he actually went through the same troubles, the same situations that we go through. And that is kind of the rough idea on what's happening within the world and what was happening with Mark and everything in between whilst he was writing this gospel. But what does he actually say? What does he actually want to tell us as the reader? Well, hopefully, if you enjoyed this little video, we can find that out next time, because I've been stood up now for about half an hour and I just want to sit down and have a nice cup of coffee. But let me know what you think so far. If you got any questions, then please leave them in the comments down below, and hopefully I should be able to answer them pretty decently. And if they're not, relevant to that thing, hopefully I can answer them in later videos. But thank you guys ever so much for watching. Have a fantastic day, stay safe, and God bless to you.